In this scene I have a green residence and a vertical axis wind turbine. I'll make a test render to show you the starting point for this tutorial. Right now the wind turbine doesn't look that convincing because it's still. We can create the illusion of motion in a still by blurring the object that's in motion. Now this is part of our unconscious at this point because one of the idiosyncrasies of photography is that objects in motion tend to be blurred because they are moving quicker than the shutter speed is capturing reality. Now we can simulate this in 3ds Max and Viz. Motion blur is a multipass rendering effect, much like depth of field, so it's managed through the camera object. I'll select the camera from the viewport menu, and I'll go ahead down here and enable the multipass effect. I'll select motion blur from the drop-down and click preview. We're getting motion blur here on this object because the object is animated. You can see down here as I scrub the time slider that I've animated this rotation. And learning how to animate goes beyond the scope of this video. You can learn more about that in the final module on animation. Once you have an animated object, you can create motion blur. I'll go down here and show you that the motion blur effect has its own set of parameters. You can control how much blur occurs with the duration parameter. Right now it's blurring across one frame, so it's not very blurry. If I blur that across 3 frames, we'll get more blur. And you can preview that in the viewport. Now I think this rendering would look more realistic if this vertical pole was actually vertical in the rendering. And I can accomplish that by applying the camera correction modifier, and that automatically creates a 2-point perspective. Now the motion blur is still set in the camera, which is still accessible in the stack. I'll go ahead and make the rendering. And just like the depth of field effect, this is being processed in 12 passes. So you have to multiply the time it takes to render a single still times 12 in order to create this blurred effect. And it's coming in incrementally into the rendered frame window. And there you have it. It looks a lot more realistic with the illusion of motion created by blur